Thank you, everyone, for being patient as we get the webinar going here. I'm Dan Kelly. I'm the board chair of the Michigan Coalition. I want to say welcome to our 30th anniversary event for the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness. Thank you for making the time for another virtual event. Thank you to the members and partners of the organization. Without you, MICA wouldn't be what it is today. I also want to thank our sponsors for today, starting with our silver sponsors, Harold Mass Consulting, who's a new sponsor and former board member, Brand's Steakhouse, owner State Representative Tommy Brand, our 2020 Legislative Action Champion, Community Housing Network, a new sponsor and an AmeriCorps host site and MICA member. Next, I want to thank our gold sponsors, Catherine and Douglas McClure, Catherine being a new board member, the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, a frequent Breakfast of Champions sponsor, Well Sky, 2020 Homeless Awareness Month sponsor, Blue Cross Complete of Michigan, a frequent sponsor and also winner of the 2020 Homeless Awareness Month sponsorship as well. Michigan Realtors Association, a frequent sponsor of this event and supporter of the coalition. Ruth Ellis Center, a really powerful, transformative organization operating in Detroit area, a new sponsor as well as an AmeriCorps host site and MICA member. Lake Trust Credit Union, another new sponsor. MSU Federal Credit Union Desk Drawer Fund, and yet another new sponsor. I want to thank our Pearl sponsor, Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis. They're a frequent supporter of the coalition and our mission across the state. And with that said, Ann Shires wanted to speak briefly from the Home Loan Bank.
Thank you, Dan. As Dan mentioned, I'm Anna Shires, the Detroit-based Community Investment Outreach Partner for the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis. The Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness has been a very strong partner of ours over the years, and we're grateful to be with you here today. So for those that aren't as familiar with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis, we are part of the larger Federal Home Loan Bank system, created really at the same time as the Federal Reserve in the 1930s, and have been here ever since. We are set up as districts, so the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis covers both Michigan and Indiana, so we are just as much here in Michigan as we are in Indiana, despite Indianapolis in our name. We have a series of grant programs available for affordable rental and home ownership, as well as small business support. Our affordable housing program is our flagship program and includes up to $500,000 in grants available for affordable housing developers and nonprofits across the district and state. Points are allocated towards nonprofit developers, units set aside for those experiencing homelessness and or those that have special needs, and projects that include tenant rental assistance. So in that, the past 5 years, I'm proud to share that FHLBI has allocated just under $25 million in affordable housing grant dollars to shelters and permanent supportive housing throughout the district, and just under $9 million here in the state of Michigan. We're focused on strengthening our partnerships with affordable housing developers and nonprofits to make sure that we increase the number of units available to all residents in our district that are battling homelessness. If you're interested in learning more about our programs, please reach out to me on email. I can drop that in the chat, or I can at least ask the MICA team to do so. So with that, thank you and congrats on the 30th anniversary.
Thanks, Anna, for sharing that. Obviously, as we all know, low-income housing tax credits and all the affordable housing development in our country is really the way to end homelessness. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Next, I do want to thank our diamond sponsor, which is NAI of Michigan. They are a new sponsor of this year. Thank you, NAI, for your support of this great event. Our agenda today, we've got a video and an amazing keynote. Amanda Andere, she's the CEO of Funders Together to End Homelessness. They're a powerful organization bringing people together to end homelessness across the country and really doing some transformative work. So really excited to hear from her. But first, we've got a video highlighting the pivotal moments in the work to prevent and end homelessness in Michigan over the last 30 years. We've had a lot of collective efforts across the state, and we wanted to start off by sharing that in this brief video.
Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Huffnagel. I'm the Executive Director of the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness. Beginning my 10th year of service with the organization, and I'm extremely pleased to see you all join us today, celebrating Micah's amazing 30-year journey. I'd like to spend a few minutes giving you an overview of our last year, just to help you understand the kinds of things that we've been involved with just in the last 12 months. So during the past year, we've continued to grow and evolve, and that's included the addition of new staff, and I wanted to acknowledge them very quickly. This includes Allison Green, plucked out of Wayne COC, and Eleanor Kolazinski, the intern that couldn't get away. We've also been delighted to add a couple of HMIS staff members, Angela Gardy and Thurston Alexander Smith. While we've been fortunate to have added some great new staff, this last year has been filled with tremendous challenges. Next slide. And so many of you and the organizations you work for, the world changed and we pivoted. We all pivoted. A massive amount of staff time was devoted to learning more about COVID-19. Our staff gathered information about guidelines and trends, understanding the needs of the frontline staff, and helping to provide the correct information in the right quantity, and using various methods to get that information out to the field. From the onset, we began holding regular meetings with staff, with state partners to help facilitate the communication across partners and out to partners in the field. As I've tried to explain it many times, the amount of information that was being disseminated in the first couple of months was unimaginable and daunting. And our goal was to bring that flow of information down from a fire hose to a faucet so that it could actually be utilized more effectively. Very early on, we were also fortunate to access funding, which enabled us to provide modest grants to help support 11 agencies with emergent needs relating to COVID-19. All I can say is it's good to have national partners who can help you with those kinds of grants. Next slide. As COVID progressed, we also took an active role in developing and carrying out messaging regarding COVID-19 throughout the homeless service delivery system. Next slide. Also wanted to talk about the Michigan Statewide Homeless Management Information System. It continues to be an integral part of our work and our identity, and good things are continuing to happen. As an example, last summer we hosted the first virtual HMIS Summit, which was extremely well received. And just this last month, we've launched the HMIS Data Warehouse. Now that's a project that's been 14 months in the making. Nothing good happens easily. The data warehouse is designed to be an interactive tool for agencies and communities, COCs, and state partners to better understand the demographics and outcomes of people being served, particularly around racial, ethnic, and other subpopulation categories. Back up on the slide there. I just wanted to continue talking about the data warehouse because it is so important. At the launch, partners will be able to drill down on demographic characteristics, and we'll be able to evaluate standardized outcomes such as length of time homeless, exits to permanent housing, returns to homelessness, and access to employment, cash, non-cash, and health insurance benefits. The warehouse is built around the HUD data standards and standardized federal reporting logic, and that will permit partners to compare their performance with comparable data sets using similar analytics. The data warehouse will revolutionize both access to and the ability to use data across homeless providers and partners in the state of Michigan. Next slide now. So very quickly wanted to touch on AmeriCorps. Our AmeriCorps program had another successful year with 26 member slots filled by host sites around the state where they're actively engaged in direct service. We also completed successfully our inaugural year of an AmeriCorps Vista program, strengthening agencies through capacity building activities. And another exciting thing happened, which you just saw, is AmeriCorps underwent a rebranding. And I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that in case they see this new logo, they understand what it is. And that's to help raise awareness of the program and its impacts in communities throughout the country. We also continue to carry out our role as a resource for communities and agencies around the state through active training and technical assistance activities. Next slide. Well, COVID-19 caused us and everybody else to reconsider in-service training. We went all in on the webinar format, and we established a monthly webinar schedule that sought to address wide-ranging needs from the field. And this ranged from various one-hour sessions, as you can see some examples here on this slide. Next slide, please. And it also included things such as this unique content that was accompanied by more in-depth training. This is a recent webinar and a workshop that we were very pleased to coordinate in conjunction with some state partners, including CEDM, the Michigan Community Action, and the League for Public Policy. I mean, Mark Horvath, are you kidding me? Invisible People is great. And Barbara Poppy, the former executive director of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. That was quite a lineup. We're very excited about that. Now, moving on to advocacy, that's been something that we have continued to grow in over the last several years, and we're very pleased to be talking about that. Within the context, though, of this year, our work really did pivot quite a bit to COVID-19. It began in the second week of March of 2020, and it really hasn't ceased since then. We have been looking at COVID-19 through that lens with a lot of the work that we continue to do. MCAH really actively advocated for at the federal level for federal relief packages, as an example. We also elevated the issue of racial inequity in the state involving greater health risks relating to homelessness and housing stability, which really became even more apparent as an impact of COVID-19. Next slide, please. Once appropriated at the federal level, our advocacy then turned to the state as we continue to work to educate and motivate our legislature to release the funds from the federal relief package. While still an incredibly important issue, there was much more than COVID on our minds. And so I wanted to make sure that you understood that we pivoted to COVID-19, but not to the exclusion of other things. Next slide, please. So we were pleased to host our first virtual Michigan Homelessness Advocacy Day and a Homelessness 101 educational session that was targeting elected officials and their staff. And those are two things that we've done for a number of years. We continue to pursue issues that really have meaningful impacts on individuals and families affected by homelessness and housing instability in the state of Michigan. Next slide, please. Of course, our Legislative Action Committee continued to meet monthly. Next slide. We found that legislators and members of Congress could be even more accessible to larger numbers of advocates, and we were excited to help make that happen. Through our own engagement initiatives and joining forces with our national partners, such as the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and other state partners, such as the Michigan League for Public Policy, we've been able to have virtual meetings with legislators, members of Congress, and their staff throughout the year. Just wanted to recognize the fact that as the sole statewide organization focused on the issue of homelessness in Michigan, we're really pleased to work with national organizations through their regular partner calls, policy work groups, and other regular communications to stay abreast of what's happening at the federal level so that we can bring that information back home and share with you. Next slide. But I also wanted to acknowledge that we're engaged at the state and local level with various organizations whose missions and goals intersect with ours. These logos are a small representation of all the organizations that we work with in a more formal capacity. We couldn't fit them all on one slide, so I want to really acknowledge we have a pretty far-reaching network throughout the state. Moving on. Our advocacy work also took a twist this year. We expanded our vision a bit. We made it a point to pursue voter engagement and outreach during the 2020 elections. Next slide. We worked with organizations around the state to help get the message out that housing and homelessness are priority issues. Next slide. And our initiative also sought to increase voter registration and enfranchisement to remind, motivate, and facilitate voting amongst persons experiencing homelessness. Next slide. It included the identification of peer ambassadors and education through things like webinars and other collateral materials. Next slide. And then, of course, we sponsored Homeless Awareness Month, which you heard earlier in the video. Next slide. It included an annual poster contest and the annual gubernatorial proclamation that we pursue. Next slide, please. This year, we were also very pleased to bring on sponsors, formal sponsors of Homeless Awareness Month. Next slide. And to use, we also used the month to recognize our commitment and the commitment and tremendous effort of those folks working in the field. We wanted to make sure that that was the messaging we put out that month, that there's some very difficult work being done. We wanted to recognize the tremendous things that people were doing and continue to do on behalf of those who are homeless. Next slide. But we also wanted to raise awareness about inequitable impact of COVID-19, and that was part of the messaging that we did put out. Okay, next slide. We also had infographics as part of some of the work that we had done with the messaging and putting data points out. Next slide, please. Did also want to touch on our involvement, our continued involvement with the Campaign to End Homelessness. In addition to all of the programming that we own and operate as MICAH, we've been very pleased to continue the engagement with the Campaign to End Homelessness through representation on the Michigan Homeless Policy Council and also participation in various work groups. That includes the training work group, and you can see a slide here that is an example of the type of training that was done, and this was in partnership with the campaign. Neurobiology of Trauma had over 300 attendees, pretty massive engagement with folks. Next slide. We also, through the communications work group, have continued to work on the annual data report. It's charged with developing the annual data report using HMIS data and some other sources to really paint the picture of homelessness in the state of Michigan. Next slide. I know that was a lot to take in. We covered a lot. Our organization covered a lot of ground last year, and there's so many more things that I didn't even touch on. I just kind of scratched the surface, broad strokes. So you may be asking, what's next? Well, you should be expecting more of the same, lots more, including things like, next slide, the second annual HMIS Summit, which is scheduled for July 27th through the 29th. Next slide. We're really excited about the formation of a source of income work group that is now underway. We really think this can be impactful, and we're very excited about the array of partners that are at the table focusing on this issue. Next slide. I'm also pleased to share that our organization is just completing a strategic planning process. The results aren't ready for prime time yet, but expect to hear more soon regarding where we're headed over the next 3 years and beyond, and to learn about the planned rebranding activities that we're going to be undertaking. There's more to come. Be ready. We'll be getting the information out to you, and we look forward to your continued partnership and being involved with our organization, our collective organization. With that, I'm delighted to move forward with our program by introducing our main speaker. That's Amanda Masico and Dare.
Hi everyone, this is Laurel Birchfield, and apologies, Amanda has not joined us yet, so we're going to show you a quick video first of all of the fantastic partners who participated in our earlier video acknowledging our 30-year anniversary. So Allison, may I ask you to show that?
Great. I have to say I pulled my favorite part out of that video, which is 3 cheers for 30 years. It had not dawned on me, but I'm going to start using that. Well, with that, we're very pleased to have a special guest speaker today. Amanda Masiko-Andere is with us, and I'm going to turn it over to her right now. Welcome, Amanda.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me, and congratulations as well. I am so excited to be with you all today, honored really, and to spend some time wrestling with the question, how do we achieve housing justice and racial justice through reform, transformation, reimagination, or do we need to join others in the fight for abolition? If we want to achieve housing justice, it is so important to understand how we got here. And that starts with recognizing that the history of this country began with taking land that was not ours. Wherever you are, I encourage you to go to nativeland.ca and enter your location. I'm in Northern Virginia, right outside of DC, on the ancestral land of the Montauk tribe. At another land recognition at a conference I attended, one of the Native elders said, "Many of our ancestors have died waiting for people to seek their knowledge." This has stuck with me. It is, I think, pertains uniquely to our work in housing. Does that happen in our communities? Have the people closest to the problem, who are closest to the solution, died waiting for us in power to seek their wisdom to truly end homelessness and housing poverty? Do they know better than us as gatekeepers what would make their community vibrant and safe? Think about that in our time together today. Next slide. A little bit about me and my organization. Yes, I'm the CEO of Funders Together to End Homelessness, a national network of over 250 funders from across the country that has for the last 5 years moved from centering racial equity to leading with racial and housing justice, because we know centering is still oriented to our viewpoint, a viewpoint often void of the knowledge of people with lived experience and expertise. At Funders Together, we are every day wrestling with the question, what does it look like to develop anti-racist policies in grant making and government? How do we be more pro-Black, pro-Indigenous, and pro-LGBTQ? Next slide. But I am first and always a Black woman, an immigrant, a child of immigrants, and that has shaped every part of my life. I am not just an advocate, I'm a disruptor of the status quo. Next slide. If you could show up as your true, authentic self in your work and in your life, what would your title be? Do the people you work with, your colleagues, the folks that experience homelessness, get to show up as their true, authentic selves? Next slide. The one thing that has authentically shaped my life more than anything is my faith. I'm a Christian, a radical lover of Jesus who believes that Jesus would have been on the side of justice and liberation from systems of oppression. I'm a Christian that does not operate in tolerance, but inclusion and in love. This slide is from another speech that I gave where they captured so beautifully and eloquently my words of justice and liberation and joy. And I hope we get to capture those thoughts and wrestle with these words that are so important to me today. But I must sit with the truth as the world starts to open back up. As many of us are forced into thinking about going back to normal, but we know that we can't go back to normal because normal means oppression, racism. Normal for a lot of folks is being harmed by our capitalist society. Over the last year plus, our country has grappled with the pandemic, the overdue awakening to racism, and the uprising in response to over 400 years of oppression. I've started to ask myself, as I've wrestled as well, now what would Jesus do? What am I doing that does not represent the radical love of Jesus? And before you close your ears, because maybe you are of a different faith or no faith at all, just know that this is my truth. The part of equity and inclusion is I get to show up as my authentic self. That doesn't mean that I am saying my truth has to be your truth. But we can share some truths about our systems, about our country. Whatever you believe in, whatever drives you to wake up every day, is what I hope will point you to how to deal with the horrific truths of our country, the history and the current, and what you all see every day on the front lines. So you might assume, because I am a Black woman who works daily on racial justice, that I live a life that is woke. But the reality is uprooting the dominant culture in my life, the internalized racism in myself, and understanding what we mean when we say equity versus justice takes daily work. It, for me, is like working out. When I really do it, like I did this morning, I feel the pain from the weights and the movement that stretch me, and that's when I know I'm making progress. And in a moment of awakening myself, an uprising happened in me. I realized that my atheist, agnostic, Jewish, and Muslim friends and colleagues who were preaching the gospel of abolition made me a better Christian. I want to give you a little insight into that journey, as I hope you leave here today with more questions and answers, and your own uprising in your soul and constitution, the type of awakening that leaves you questioning the status quo and gets to radical reimagining of how we work towards ending homelessness through racial and housing justice. Next slide. I want to first ground ourselves in some truths. Many of you might have heard these truths before, but I believe we model the work of uprooting white supremacy and oppression and leading with racial equity and justice by starting on the same page and doing it every time we start to have these discussions. We know that despite the rhetoric, COVID-19 was not a great equalizer. In fact, it only exacerbated structural inequities that already existed. Black, Native American, and Latinx communities have been impacted by the virus at disproportionate rates. What's important to remind ourselves is that the disparities we are seeing are rooted in structural racism and are not about race. This is not about pre-existing conditions. It's about pre-existing inequities from stolen indigenous land and chattel slavery. As Race Forward reminds us, COVID-19 killed and is killing. Structural racism is its accomplice. As many of us heard the words of Eric Garner in the last words of George Floyd, "I can't breathe," we know that suffocation and oppression is not confined to police brutality. Racism is taking every opportunity from us to feel like we can breathe without oppression in our housing, education, health, and criminal legal system. The public lynching of Black men takes our breath away, and the constant structural racism is killing us slowly, leaving us gasping for air as we call out for real change through anti-racist policy. And what makes it hard to catch a breath is that we know this system is not broken. It was designed by white supremacist slave owners on stolen indigenous land to protect their interests. It is working just as it was designed. So when the verdict of Derek Chauvin was announced and folks call it justice, I bristled. That was not justice. Justice would mean George Floyd was still alive. And so the question we must ask ourselves is, what does housing justice mean for our work and our movement? Is justice about ending someone's homelessness, or is justice about fundamentally changing the conditions that lead to the trauma of homelessness? And if we're really truth-telling, how do we get to liberation, where we don't have the issues of homelessness, where we don't have lack of healthcare, where we don't have lack of good paying jobs? I believe that if we are not waking up every day to go beyond reform and start to think about transformation, reimagining and abolishing systems that lead to homelessness and housing insecurity, we are complicit in the trauma. We might end someone's homelessness, but we have not done anything to change the conditions that cause homelessness to happen, nor, I would argue, are you doing anything to ensure that folks have agency and power over where and how they live after they have experienced homelessness. Next slide. We know these truths. Black people comprise 13% of the general population in the United States and 26% of those living in poverty. But they account for more than 40% of the homeless population, so poverty rates alone do not explain overrepresentation. Next slide. The proportion of Black and American Indian and Alaska Native individuals experiencing homelessness exceeds their proportion of those living in poverty. 7% of youth in the United States are LGBTQ, while 40% of youth experiencing homelessness are LGBTQ. Moreover, LGBTQ young people are 120% more likely to experience homelessness than non-LGBTQ youth. I hope I'm saying stats and data that you have already heard over and over again as you start your own awakening about the disparities that have been right there in our community, living on the HUD website for over 12 years now. But I think, again, it's important to note. Youth who are Black and LGBTQ reported the highest rates of homelessness at 16% compared to white LGBTQ youth at 8%. According to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, only 6% of white households are extremely low-income renters. Black households account for 12% of all households in the United States and 19% of all renters, but they account for 26% of all renter households with extremely low incomes. Likewise, we see the same for Latinx households. I remind you of these truths because we can no longer talk about homelessness in relation to just poverty. We must be explicit in naming that homelessness and housing insecurity is deeply connected to structural racism. Next slide. Redlining and the defunding of public housing when it started to serve more people that look like me than the white working class is what we're talking about. When I hear local leaders cracking down on people experiencing homelessness and therefore criminalizing it, we ask why a crackdown and not evidence-based solutions. But we know incarceration and criminalization is our national response to issues that have disproportionately impacted people of color, particularly Black people. Homelessness in America is the product of structural racism. Black people experiencing homelessness more frequently because they were barred from building generational wealth, because America has criminalized their existence, because opportunity in this country has never been equal. If we resort to talking about the challenge in colorblind ways, we won't identify specific and targeted solutions for those who need them the most. Instead, we will continue to recycle the same solutions that work well for some and not at all for others. Without an initial focus on racial equity and then leading with housing and racial justice, we won't interrupt the historical, institutionalized, and implicit bias in policies and practices that lead to the persistent and pervasive disproportionalities we see in all of our systems. Next slide. But what do we mean when we say racial equity, racial justice, or housing justice? Racial equity means closing the gaps so that race does not predict one's success, while also improving outcomes for all. Equity is distinct from equality in that it aspires to achieve fair outcomes and considers history and implicit bias rather than simply providing equal opportunity for everyone. Racial equity is not just the absence of overt racial discrimination, it is also the presence of deliberate policies and practices that provide everyone with the support they need to improve the quality of their lives. Racial equity is rooted in eliminating disparities. It's often the first step. And radical justice, or racial justice, well, radical justice too, but racial justice is creating power and a culture of abundance. And we have to know the difference if we're going to achieve housing justice. Next slide. Our partners at the Philanthropic Institute for Racial Equity remind us a racial equity lens separates symptoms from causes, but a racial justice lens brings into view the confrontation of power, the redistribution of resources, and the systemic transformation necessary for real change. Next slide. Justice requires urgent fundamental changes that reposition communities of color in relation to power and resources, which includes being able to challenge and shape the many institutions that determine a community's condition. Next slide. It's not just about achieving parity in our housing outcomes for those who disproportionately experience housing insecurity and homelessness. It's about repairing the result of structural racism and giving power to those historically marginalized and disenfranchised from the system that caused them harm. I define housing justice as agency and power over where people live. Next slide. The repair and reparations of government-sanctioned racism that allows folks to design their own communities and define what safety means for them. When we water down the reality of white supremacy, anti-Blackness, Native erasure, and systemic racism, and go to the comfortable space of diversity and equity and inclusion, mistaking equality for equity, thinking that if programs or policies serve people who are Black and brown, that they will achieve racial equity or justice through more programs and resources. To be anti-racist, we have to do an impact analysis of what got us here and work to change those structures, not just add more money to the problem and contribute to what I call the layer cake of racism, where we put seemingly good policies and resources on top of structures that were designed to oppress Black and Indigenous people, resulting in just bad cake. Next slide. So let's talk about power and being a gatekeeper. We can understand racial equity and how it's a path to racial justice and hopefully eventually liberation. We can ground ourselves in the need for housing justice, not just more affordable housing, but the master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house. And we have to confront the reality that the housing movement has just been putting window dressing on the master's house. We are seeking to start to transform and eventually move past our good intentions and dismantle the very systems designed to oppress and suppress. Transformation is not just a transformed or different outcome. It means transforming the process in the way we make decisions and prioritize resources. It's the literal transformation of power. It forces you to ask, how are you giving up power to Black and brown folks, especially people with lived expertise? Next slide. I believe that transformation starts with us understanding the role we all play as gatekeepers. We are all gatekeepers to the resources communities need to have agency and power over their own housing. Philanthropy, myself, we're gatekeepers to money, and in turn, nonprofits and governments become gatekeepers to that same money through our program implementation and resource allocation. And as policy advocates, we are gatekeepers in the form of access to policy decisions of policymakers. In order to achieve racial and housing justice, we have to liberate and decolonize our role as gatekeepers. And that starts with giving up power. Are we bringing people to the tables of decision-making with a folding chair or a permanent chair? When do we get to the point where we are not asking folks to come to our table of power and decision-making, but create their own table or circles that are powerful in their own right? Next slide. No, this does not mean having a consumer advisory council or people with lived experience on your board. It does not mean defining success by our proximity to whiteness. Next slide. Our partner in Black liberation, Jonathan Likes, framed transformation as this. Next slide. When we take away power from oppressive systems, bring many people with lived expertise to question those systems, push the edge of what is considered possible, shift political debate to include more radical possibilities. One of the radical possibilities I've been wrestling with is abolition. For me, abolition means just that. We abolish the current systems and reimagine with people with lived expertise, new systems, structures, and ways to build communities. So how does the work of abolition make me a better Christian, a better leader, a better co-conspirator for justice? It came to me in this moment. as I was just sitting and listening to people who have experienced the harm of many of our systems, the criminal legal system, foster care, healthcare, housing, and several young folks with more fire in their belly said, we can't call for people who murdered George Floyd and Breonna Taylor to be arrested. That is not abolition. That is revenge. Next slide. I have to say, in that moment, I said, oh, Lord, have mercy. That was it for me. The systems that have caused harm cannot repair harm. Love, grace, empathy is not carried out by perpetuating harm. It only comes in the radical reimagining of this constant experiment in the possibility of America. And the question I often get asked is, do I have hope we can get there? If you know me, you know I believe that no matter how hard our work, no matter how hard life is, we need to find joy. Joy is rooted in something deeper than fleeting happiness. It's knowing that even though things are not well, all will be well, because we have glimmers of hope. Joy comes through the shared humanity of our work, rooted in a purpose bigger than ourselves. That despite the pain, we will have joy because our lives matter. I've not felt that joy for a while, like I'm sure many of you. I've not been able to utter the words hope this last 16, 18 months. The overdue awakening to racism in our country and the rightful uprising was more painful than I expected. None of it was new, but it cut deeper into my soul. But I'm gaining back my hope. And I'm realizing that joy is the resistance to the oppression we face. Next slide. Actually, can you just go back one more slide? We'll get to that. Real change for me comes at the intersection of hope and boldness. The boldness and conviction from our movement to end homelessness and housing poverty by not tinkering around the edges, but fundamentally uprooting the oppression in our system gives me hope. I have hope because we have finally moved from implementing racial equity to pushing for racial and housing justice. I have hope because the energy on the streets is speaking louder than the people who are gatekeepers to resources and power. I have hope because we are finally hearing what communities are saying will make them feel safe. And I know we can't end homelessness until we defund and dismantle the systems designed for our oppression. I have hope, my friends, because power in our work to end homelessness and housing insecurity is finally shifting to where it rightfully belongs, to the people closest to the problem. So my question I ask you this morning is, will you join me on the journey of hope? Will you shift from learning to action? Are you ready to decolonize our systems of oppression and gatekeeping? Will you give up your power to Black, Indigenous people and people of color? Are you ready for a radical reimagining of our systems that will push us towards racial and housing justice? Will you not sit on the sidelines as an ally, but be a co-conspirator in our shared liberation? Next slide. I always end every conversation I have with this reminder. This came from one of our funder sessions that we had at the National Alliance to End Homeless Conference, where the Chief Equity Officer at the Meyer Foundation, who's local to DC, but has done work locally and nationally to uproot their white supremacy, to focus on racial equity, and now focus on Black communities in the DC area. When Aisha was interviewing for their job, their CEO, Nikki, who's actually a good friend and colleague of mine, and a bunch of people in the interview asked her a question, like, when you start, if you get the job, where will you start? Where is the low-hanging fruit? And she responded with this: there is no low-hanging fruit. The tree is 400 years old and the roots are deep. These trees are deeply rooted in racism and the fruit they bear is rotten. We have to plant new seeds and toil new soil. So I am honored to be on this journey with all of you in the movement. I know that today you showed up in various forms virtually. I hope that we can plant new seeds and toil new soil together in the name of racial and housing justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Really terrific. I just want to say that there's no question as to why you were invited to speak. I really think you had some powerful and thought-provoking ideas and messages that are extremely timely now, focusing on systemic change and intentionality in how we're trying to address the issue of inequality. So I really want to thank you for being here. I would like to open it up with questions. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them into the question box. I know that we have one already. Let me just toss this out to you, if that's okay, Amanda. What can we do to support and lift the voices of individuals of color, particularly those struggling with housing insecurity or homelessness?
Well, you can support them by examining why they don't have voice or power. And it might be because of well, I know it is. It is the water we're swimming in. White supremacy is the water that we're swimming in. And so it's not our job to necessarily lift them up. It's our job to figure out how we move out of the way, how we change our culture so they are sitting at the table again with a permanent chair and the ability to create their own power and systems and culture. We pay them, right, for their time in real ways. We used to say not just with pizza and soda, and now I say like not just a living wage, but a consultant wage, like what you would pay consultants. You should be paying people with lived expertise. But it's really about getting it out of the way. It's really about giving up power, and that's a hard thing for us to do.
Thank you. Another question. How can we apply these concepts of racial equity and justice to our day-to-day work life?
Well, you have to start somewhere. I always remind people that, in the short time we have together today, so 30, 40 minutes, we're not going to uproot 400 years of structural racism. But I hope that I've planted a seed in you to start to think about how do we learn the racialized history of our country, learn and develop racial equity analysis, start to test out what does it mean to like uproot the way that we are thinking in our policies and our practices, and by listening first and foremost to people with lived expertise, especially Black and Brown folks. So it's not about just learning something and just applying it over here. That's a very traditional white dominant way of thinking about things. What it is about is really internalizing internalizing the systems and powers and structures that have led to this oppression, and then uprooting them and dismantling them from our workspaces and our cultures, right? So a lot of times we think about like, how do we operationalize racial equity? And I've realized that is even a white dominant construct. So I say to you, it is work. It is daily hard work. It requires learning. It requires testing out new things. It requires being specific about what you're doing and what you're not doing. But it requires having real capacity, having the resources to engage experts in this work to wrestle with you. It requires not having the racial equity work live in a committee or a subgroup, but be a part of your everyday planning. If it's not a part of your strategic plan, if it's not a part of your development plan, if it's not a part of your financial plan, you are not doing racial equity and racial justice.
Thank you. And so that question was more about day-to-day work life, individual micro kind of focus. But another question, what transformative changes can we work towards that systematically empower Michiganders of color, particularly those struggling with housing insecurity or homelessness?
Yeah, again, I always want to be careful about using the words empower, right? People have power. Systems oppress and take power away from people that is rightfully theirs. So we don't need to actually empower anyone. what we need to do is change systems. So the long-term liberation goals that we have are around things like universal housing vouchers. It's around, like I said before, giving agency and choice to where people live. So we have to tackle the hard stuff like zoning, right? Like land use, like resources to get people out of housing and into housing stability in a way that is just not moving them to the next more affordable place. It's about actually understanding where they want to live, what they want that community to look like. And that should be our North Star. I actually think that we can get really close to that in our lifetime. I always say that this work is a 50-year liberation journey, and we might not get to see the fruits of our labor. I remind myself daily that the people that I used to sit in church with, now sit virtually in church with, who led in the civil rights movement, didn't do it for themselves, right? They did it for my future. They just happened to get to see the fruits of their labor. And so we have to remind ourselves that we're talking about big picture, hard stuff. But when we are on the precipice of an opportunity like we are now, it means taking advantage of the policy and advocacy and the organizing and the activism it's going to take to say, hey, federal resources, we need to think about housing differently for low-income folks. Hey, local and state government resources, we need to be partnering with the federal government to reimagine our systems so housing is a reality for everyone as a right, as an entitlement, as something that is there for folks. And I think that we can get there.
So that kind of leads into the next question. I'll just give you the question and its comment as well. It feels like a powerful moment to leverage influence federally. For example, needed PHA reform so people stop getting screened out of housing solutions, sustainable revenue supporting or revenue opportunities for services, disrupting harm caused by rigid coordinated entry practices. Any tips on how we can influence these needed policy changes at a federal level, in addition to what we're doing locally and statewide?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I believe that we need to create a more radical movement around housing justice. I think that we do really well at what I call top-down advocacy and policy, and we have people working at the national level who are doing great, important, incredible work around housing. And a lot of you local housing policy folks are also working in your states and then helping those national groups to tell the stories and the reality and to push your congressional delegation around housing and housing justice. But we need more activism, I think. We need more organizing. Our practices and policies are still very rooted in what we think is the best and maybe not what people with lived expertise think are the best. So I believe that we need to redo and rethink the way that we do policy and advocacy to be more oriented to organizing, activism, and power building. It's on funders to resource that in a way that feels tangible and gives the capacity for folks to grow and stretch that way. So if there are funders in the virtual room, to be thinking about if you're resourcing systems change, but also resourcing groups to think more about policy and advocacy and organizing. We should be marching on the Capitol in real demonstrated ways, peacefully marching, obviously, to bring attention and show the housing injustices that are happening. And not just marching, that's one tool, but I'm talking about not holding folks accountable to the real issues that we're seeing, but not in ways that I think traditional advocacy and policy lets us do it in different ways.
Awesome, thank you. Quick question, somebody's asking, could you please repeat the web address that you mentioned earlier regarding Indigenous people, where they,
oh, yeah.
where,
sure.
where they, yeah.
Yeah, so it's nativeland.ca. It's Native Land, or you can just Google Native Land. There's also an app. Or you can use the website version.
And I visited that before because I'm geeky, and that's very cool. Thank you for sharing that with everybody. So you mentioned, you referred to funders. How should we be framing this with private funders if we want to move forward on an initiative?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, and by the way, I feel like it's not just your job to frame it. That's part of my job. You know, my job as a leader of philanthropy in the housing movement is to push them, to challenge them every day. I say to them often that they should be dismantling themselves and thinking about turning over resources to community. So just know that I'm doing that. I'm practicing what I'm preaching. But I will say the frame to funders around the work has to be in a frame of abundance, because I know sometimes when I talk about resourcing things like policy and advocacy and systems change, and moving away from this idea of just programmatic funding, people often say, but our programs still need to run. There's still people on the streets in housing crises, and both things are true. And so we need to be framing to funders. One, it can't just be the funders who are committed to housing and homelessness. We have to get funders who are engaged in education and health, funders who think about kids aging out of foster care, funders who are reforming the criminal legal system, who should know that if all that reform happens, which, yay, we want that to happen, what's going to happen we will create another homelessness problem if we don't have the housing for returning citizens. So framing it as a multi-sector issue, not a single issue struggle, to engage more funders. So many times funders I know will say to you, stop siloing yourselves. Well, you need to say to them, and I do too, stop being siloed. I think it's about creating a posture and a position of abundance to say, funding program work is important, but we have to do the long-term liberation work of policy building and power and advocacy. And we need to figure out ways to resource the immediate needs, but also the long-term vision. And having those frank conversations with funders, understanding that that racial equity and racial justice is the work. It's not just something that you do on the side. If we're not doing racial equity, if we're not leading with racial equity and racial justice, we're not ending homelessness. We're not ending housing insecurity. But the capacity to do that takes resources. It takes an analysis that you're not just going to develop on your own, right? And so helping them understand that they can be on a path with you to develop that analysis, to understand, so they can be better in their grant making and also in support of your work, I think, is a start.
Yeah, it's not an and or, it's both. Same
Right.
path. Correct. Thank you. How should we be, this last question here, how should we be, what are the practical first steps that we at MCAH, a statewide advocacy organization, can take as an organization to support the moves towards justice?
Well, I think you're taking a first step now in having the conversation and asking yourselves, how are we having this conversation on a daily basis that's not just about having the conversation, but moving towards action? And I always say that in balance, right? People want to quickly get past the learning and unlearning and get straight to action, because learning about racism is painful. It's tough. That's why we see so many folks trying to ban critical race theory, ban really learning about history, because it makes us confront some truths and realities that is hard. So I would say stick around for that hard work, right? The second thing I would say is to think about your relationship with power and how you might be perpetuating some of those power dynamics as gatekeepers. And so start to think about how you can engage people with lived expertise, especially Black and Brown and Native folks, young people, in your analysis, in your policy decisions, in your analysis, in your advocacy work, but not in extractive way, right? In a transformational way that really is about collaboration and really working and wrestling together. And I think, you know, having that power dynamic uprooted and changed and confronted and challenged every single day and every decision that you make is the start. When it starts to feel super uncomfortable, when you start to look around and you don't see the people that you normally see, right? When you start to realize that to actually do the policy and advocacy work means positioning yourself differently, and that might not result in an immediate reform, but it might help in a long-term transformation. That's when you know that you're starting to do the work. And so I think that's how you start.
Great, sound advice. We really appreciate that. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for joining us today and giving of your time, sharing of your thoughts and expertise. This is really helpful. I greatly appreciate it, and so appreciative of you being a part of our 30th anniversary event. You really are the icing on the cake today. So thank you so much. And thank you for taking time to answer the questions that we had come in as well. And hopefully we'll continue our engagement with you in the future, and we will do you proud.
I know you will. We are in this work together. Congratulations on 30 years. And to all of you, take good care of yourselves. Stay strong, stay in the fight, and be bold, but be kind and joyful to each other.
Thank you so much. Take care. Have a great day. Okay, we're going to move on now to some closing remarks. Dan Kelly, our board president, should be rejoining us. There he is. There you go, Dan. Welcome back.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks again, Amanda, for laying out a framework, a path to liberation, and your confidence that we can get close to that in 50 years. I know often when I look at that tree of systemic and structural oppression and racism, and it's overwhelming to think about everything that needs to be done in terms of just everything we need to do to make these huge changes to not only our society, but ourselves. Your framing of not only the work that needs to be done, but also a time horizon and your confidence that we can get there was just incredibly helpful, and it really invigorating for me, and I hope others, in terms of just the work that we need to do to get where we want to be as a society. And I love this 50-year time horizon. So thank you again for that. With that said, we can't do this work as an agency and as a community on ending homelessness without members and partners. We're a member-based organization. We appreciate all of our members and partners at MICAH. We need your continued support to do this work. So just wanted to ask anyone, if you're not a member, or whether it's individual or organizational, please, we invite you to join us in this way. To do that, you just have to go to mihomeless.org and sign up for a membership. And it's a great way to get involved on all the advocacy and policy and the lifting of voices across our community statewide. It's an excellent way to come together as part of our 30th anniversary and moving forward in the next 50 years here. So please consider joining at mihomeless.org. With that said, in conclusion, I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you again to Amanda, Eric, for stewarding this event, and really look forward to seeing everyone next year when we return in person to our Breakfast of Champions event. Thank you again.